Welcome back to the Literacy Lunch Break. I'm your host, Marjorie Botari, and today we have Alvin Irby joining us. We are so excited to talk to him about all that he's done. He's been a comedian, an educator, a thought leader, and founder of Barbershop Books. So thank you so much for finding time today for us in your busy schedule, Alvin.
Thank you for having me.
So as you just heard, I listed a lot of different hats that you wear, and I would love for you to share with our listeners what inspired you to wear all of those different hats and what you've learned along the way as you've done different things, both from being an educator to, creating a really important initiative with Barbershop Books.
One of the things that I don't often talk a lot about, but that I do think has played a big role in my, willingness to try new or different things, is that I learned to crochet at the age of 7.
Wow.
And it was not something that anybody, not along little black boys, were doing in Little Rock, Arkansas when I was growing up. But what crocheting taught me, and I did it through middle school, through high school. When I moved to New York City, I would crochet on the subway. But what I believe it taught me was that not to care enough about what other people thought, to stop doing something that I was passionate about or good at. And I think that so many people, they have all kinds of gifts, all kinds of skills, all kind of interests, but sometimes kind of the opinions or perceptions of others may cause them to decide, you know what, I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to stop doing that. And so I think that when there have been things that I've been curious about, I've kind of decided to kind of, even if I didn't have all the answers, even if I wasn't sure how other people might receive it, I just kind of decided to put kind of one foot in front of the other. But I would say that, that along with, my mom, she was a elementary school teacher in the Little Rock School District for more than 30 years. And so, and my dad, although I didn't kind of grow up with him, he was a barber for a significant part of his life. And so I kind of think it's kind of impossible to kind of not see those parts of my background and my life as being, influences in kind of the work that I do today.
Yeah, that I did not know that about your dad. So yeah, you brought your mom, the educator, and the barbershop, and you put those together and created a great initiative. I watched your TED Talk, and just so inspiring. And you brought up so many important pieces as we think about just education in general, but some really important topics. And I was listening and jotting down so much, but I would love for you to share with our listeners just, what really prompted you specifically with Barbershop Books, what kind of called your attention to this need? Because again, I think there's really some important pieces that not everybody really recognizes, from just the percent of, African-American male teachers that students see as role models, to the type of books that we're asking students to read versus, really talking about not only that skill set of being able to read, but reading for enjoyment, reading for entertainment, reading something that's fun. So I would love for you to share with listeners that maybe haven't listened to your TED Talk yet, really what kind of drove that initiative.
So I taught first grade in the Bronx, and there was a barbershop across the street from my school. So one day I was getting a haircut. One of my first grade students came into the barbershop, and he was looking a little bored. He starts getting antsy. His mom is like, sit down. And the whole time that I'm like watching this happen, it kind of, I guess a light bulb went off, but more so than like thinking about innovation. I just remember thinking, he should be practicing his reading right now. And I wished I had a children's book to give him, but I didn't. And so it was in many ways a chance encounter with one of my first grade students, me knowing his reading level, me kind of, being an educator, an early childhood educator, and then understanding kind of the cultural significance of many, barbershops in Black communities, that kind of, all of that kind of created this idea. I wasn't sure what would become of it, but years later, once I actually began putting these little colorful kid-sized bookshelves in barbershops, talking to families, talking to boys themselves, talking to barbers, I really began to understand that the program that I had created wasn't just about book access, but it really presented this opportunity to go deeper and I think peel back some layers that often aren't a part of kind of traditional conversations about literacy in the areas that I would say um, barbershop books, is a little different is in our focus on reading identity. So our program, uh, our book curation, our trainings, it's not just about ensuring that boys or Black boys have access to books, but access to books that they actually want to read for
Hmm.
fun. And people ask us, like, how do you choose your books? And I say simply, we ask Black boys what they want to read, and then we literally buy the books that they want to read, and then we distribute those to the barbershops. Um, it's interesting to, when we hear the recommendations of books, directly from boys, and we contrast that against some of the book lists that may be curated exclusively for them, there does appear to be a little bit of a disconnect where some of the criteria that adults are using to curate content um, doesn't exactly align with kind of the criteria that boys or some children in general are using to decide kind of what books they read when it's not required. So
Right.
that's definitely an important part is the kind of curation piece being linked to not just a part of Black boys that you can see, but also the parts of their identity, their personality, their interests that you can't see, that you would have to kind of ask or observe in order to kind of know. And then I think also connected to the idea of reading identity development is the importance of relevant or relatable reading role models. And in the case of Black boys, a lot of our work focuses on increasing access to Black male reading role models.
Hmm.
Less than 2% of teachers K to 12 are Black men, and a majority of Black children are raised by single mothers. And so for some children, you have a situation where um, they don't have access to Black male reading role models at school or at home, but they're going to the barbershop,
Right.
once or twice a month. And so for some boys, they literally see their barbers more than they see their fathers. And so it's that kind of cultural component and the relationships that barbers have with many young boys that creates this unique opportunity to not just encourage or promote reading, but to actually show young Black boys and other vulnerable children that reading is important. It's something that can be for you, not just for school or for some other kid or for an adult who you may not identify with.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's really what stood out to me when I was, listening to your TED talk and just thinking about that component of you're hitting on so many things, right? You said it really kind of started when you were looking at the first grader going, oh, you should be practicing your reading because we know that that's important, right? It's not skill or interest, not skill or identity. It's all of the above. And so having the access, but also seeing the role models, having books that you enjoy. I mean, you were just talking about people are like, well, how do you know which books to pick? And you kind of giggled when you said, well, we ask them, right? Like having them be part of what they're reading, what having that access to what is interesting to them and how they do identify and characters that they can relate to. I think is so critical. Um, I think it just, again, I really have so many notes from listening to you speak because it was just so powerful. But one of the things you said also in your TED talk was teaching and learning should be two ways, right? We're co-creators of knowledge. And um, I think that that is really something that's so important, and often just kind of maybe we say something, but we don't really dig in to talk about what that actually means and how critical that is. And so I would love for you to just talk a little bit more about that and what drives you with your initiatives and as an educator and as a thought leader when you think about teaching and learning and how that really is a reciprocal relationship and it should be both ways.
Well, I think that so much of the learning frameworks that are used, are deficit based,
Mhm.
and having taught kindergarten and first grade, I really do understand the importance of knowing what are the areas of growth, or what are the letters or letter sounds that a student might not know, so you can strategically support them in those particular areas. But I do think that for children for whom school is the primary place where they interact with books or where they encounter reading, then that means that those experiences may be their only reading experiences. And I mean, could you imagine as a student if every time you're talking about reading, it's talking about how you're struggling as a reader,
Mhm.
how you don't know this or how you can't do this. And so I do think that there is a really, really important kind of need for compliments, strength based compliments, to the kind of deficit based approaches and data and conversations that are happening, that center around kind of who children are, what's important to them, and then also giving them an opportunity to discover, these things about themselves as a reader. I would say that, the work that we've done with our Reading So Lit program and our Reading So Lit platform, which is a reading identity development platform, is really about just that, like creating um, the conditions, providing them access to content, and not just in the form of like books, but using images to help children explore the everyday choices that readers make, but that if they don't have books at home, if they don't have anyone reading to them or reading around them, they literally might not know, what readers do. Um, so yeah, I think that's a lot of what we at Barbershop Books think a lot about, is what are the ways in which we can amplify and center the voice and affirm the voices and perspectives and interests of boys in particular.
Yeah, and I think that's really important and something, we've been talking a lot about is the skill matters, but we are working with humans. We are right? Like there are other pieces to us and there's a science behind learning and, again, and that identity of who I am, and teachers have a heavy lift, really. I mean, you were a teacher and you know what it's like in kindergarten and first grade and the variety of needs and the variety of experiences, but it's something that I think in education as in general, thought leaders and district leaders and national leaders, we really need to be having a bigger conversation about, yes, we know the science of reading, or the science of the skill base that we're teaching, but we have to really be having a larger conversation about culture and identity and the science of learning and the role that that plays. Because again, as you said, especially coming in kindergarten and first grade, absolutely we need to teach those skills. But when it's that constant deficit, it's definitely not associated with something that is enjoyable or fun or relatable.
Reading trauma is a real thing. We talk to barbers about this idea, and we tell them explicitly, not every, boy or girl or child who comes into a barbershop is going to be excited when they see a book. For those children who maybe are fortunate enough to have a parent who, you know, cuddles up with them or curls up with them at night to read, or who they see kind of reading in their home, they may get warm and fuzzies, when they see a
Right.
book. But for other kids, that may be a trigger, and not a positive one, a negative trigger that causes anxiety or stress
Mhm.
because of traumatic or negative reading experiences they've had. And so I think a lot of our work is to just equip barbers, equip communities to create positive, student-centered reading experiences that really address a lot of the social and emotional elements of reading that aren't often talked about. So reading identity is one of those things, but also reading confidence, reading self-efficacy, reading engagement, reading motivation, and reading agency. So
Mhm.
many children, when they leave school, they're like, all right, learning done for the day, reading
Yep.
done for the day. And I think it really does not have to be that way. But I also think that, if a child, a student doesn't see reading as being a part of who they are,
Mhm.
um, then the behaviors or habits associated with being a reader may not fully form, if at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. And it gets harder as they get older, right?
Exactly, exactly.
So as you think about all of those, challenges that you just shared, what are some ways, if we have some listeners listening, and they're parents, they're educators, they're anyone that works with a child, what are some ways that they can support that?
Well, one way I think is to replace or with and. So,
That.
if a child wants to read a specific book, but you want them to maybe read something similar or that you think is better for them or better aligned with what they should be reading, it's okay to give a kid exactly, of course, if it's developmentally appropriate and that sort of
Right.
thing, but give them exactly what they're asking for, and give them something new or different that maybe you want to introduce them to. I don't think it has to be what they want to read or what you want to read. I think that, adults can and should think creatively about how to create opportunities for children to experience both. So I think that's one kind of helpful practical thing that I would share with adults. Another one is to really make the reading explicit. Children are what psychologists call egocentric, meaning that it's challenging for them to take on the perspective of someone else.
Yep. Mhm.
And the reason why I think this is relevant to this question is because, if a child sees a parent on a phone, they could be reading a bill, reading an article, reading a book, but for many children, they might assume that a adult is doing what they would want to do
Mhm.
on a smartphone, which for a lot of kids may not be reading. Maybe they
Right.
want to play video games, or maybe they want to watch YouTube videos, or they want to do something else. And so unless a parent actually makes it explicit that, or an adult, I am reading right now,
Yeah.
there's no reason for a child to know that's what's happening, or any way for them to know. And so I think that that's something that, for many adults, they don't even have to change anything about what they're doing, except to make it explicit for children in their lives that they are actually reading on a device, or a cell phone.
I
um
love that. I don't mean to interrupt because you're sharing so many good points, but I just really love that point, and I have to say I've never even thought about that. Phones, or a Kindle, or it does. It looks like a device, and just calling that out for children to say this is actual reading. Now, I have an 8th grader and a 5th grader, so when I yell at my son about how much he's on his phone, he's like, "Well, you're on your phone." And I do say, like, "Well, I'm reading emails, or I'm doing this." But I never thought to actually call out, that this is actual reading, or if I'm on a Kindle, this is what I'm doing. It's not a device. And so I just really good point for, I think, So many adults now read on devices versus an actual,
Reading
uh,
bills, reading,
yeah.
or, a lot of people read on their computers at work or even at home, but those things aren't always named. And so I think
Mhm.
a lot of parents are overwhelmed. And so the idea that, oh, they have to do all this other extra stuff
Mm.
can sometimes be kind of immobilizing. And so I do think that when we think about the type of recommendations we give, trying to think about what are the things that parents are already doing that could create opportunities for them to support early literacy development, I think is really key. I guess other suggestions I would have is like leverage environmental print, in cities and in other places. There are words all around us, even in our homes. Like, I think people don't really think about, as adults, we don't think about just how many words are actually all around us, but like the tongue of a shoe, the tag of a shirt, cooking recipes, looking at nutritional facts, looking at the food aisle, words, all of those things are real words in the real world that we really use to make real decisions. And I think that, for far too many children, they view reading as something associated with a test, associated with studying, associated with school. And I think that one of the ways that adults can help, make reading more than a chore, more than a task, is to be explicit in naming those real everyday ways in which reading plays a role in their lives, and to create opportunities for children, to be able to name and interact with those everyday uh, reading opportunities. I mean, I probably can go on and on about, different things, but the last one I will say is um, that what I've learned from teaching, young children, is that at the end of the day, many of them just want to be grown. They want to be like, act like the adults who are in their life. And so if they don't see adults who mean something to them engaging in reading,
Mhm.
why wouldn't they
Yeah.
conclude that reading isn't a part of their family or a part of, what people do in their home? And so I think that some of those strategies I shared before around naming reading also play into the importance of reading role models, and creating, these opportunities for children to identify as a reader, not just because of the content that they're given access to, but because of the adults in their lives.
I love that. And I love that you kind of wrapped up with that, because previous to that, you shared it doesn't have to be this long, drawn out thing, right? It's not, I have to spend 30 minutes every day or every night reading this book. It can be reading a recipe. It could be, we're going to the grocery store and here is a grocery list and we have to read this and we have to find this, and really helping them understand that reading is everywhere, and we can read for enjoyment, but we need to read for information. We need to read to survive, and really kind of calling attention, I think, for any role model in a child's life to see that this is something that we can do throughout the day consistently, and it doesn't have to be this huge heavy lift. And I absolutely love that, because it's so critical. um I just want to take a moment to thank you for all that you do, because I shared the many, and I'm sure I missed some things, but you have just played such a major role in really creating these opportunities and bringing to light different ways to think about access and reading identity, and just again for any caregiver to think about this in a different way. And so I just want to thank you so much for all that you do. And we will be sharing your TED Talk, but also your books that you've authored. I know I saw one about hilarious. I think it was like boogers that can be candy.
Gross to Greg. Yeah, the Barbershop Books e-library is a free online resource that features children's books by, various authors of color. And yeah, both of my children's books are available for free in their entirety in the Barbershop Books e-library. Gross Greg is about a little boy who loves to eat his boogers. You call them boogers. Greg calls them delicious little sugars. And then my most recent children's book is called The Gingerbread Man on My Block. And so it's kind of a modern urban retelling of the gingerbread man story that introduces different modes of personal transportation. So instead of just running, scoot, scoot as fast as you can, bike, bike as fast as you
I
can.
love it.
So yeah.
So great. But I mean, I looked at that, I'm like, yes. So yeah, thank you again for joining us today. And thank you for all that you do. I'm glad that our listeners get to learn from you, and hopefully we'll get to have another conversation.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we explore literacy topics in a snack-sized, easily digestible format.